Dave, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. You were a good friend of Charlie Kirk. You knew him well. Just tell me your reaction when you heard first that he'd been shot and then, of course, that he'd been killed.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. You know, I'd much rather talk about Charlie the man than Charlie the sort of political or cultural force. Charlie and I met back in 2017. I was on the left at the time. Charlie was on the right. We met at a speaking engagement. We quickly hit it off, even though we had wildly polarized views politically. And within 5 minutes of meeting him, he said, "Hey, Dave, you know, we disagree on some stuff, but you seem like a nice guy. Why don't we go on tour? We'll go to colleges together and we'll talk it out. We'll argue with each other. We'll argue with the kids, and then we'll break bread afterwards and do it again the next night." And that's what we did dozens and dozens of times. He was a radically decent human being who really was trying to do the thing that, you know, most of us want to believe we're doing, which is reaching out to the other side. We'd like to believe we're doing it, and it gets increasingly harder to do. Charlie really was doing it, and he was doing it at, I would say, ground zero for so much of the craziness that we all see, which is the college campus. He was a great human being. You know, the day that he was shot, I was in a Zoom meeting with a couple other people, and almost at the exact same time, you could see everybody's eyes kind of went the other way. We all sort of saw a story one way or another, because everybody's always staring at the internet while you're on Zoom. And then I happened to be actually just an hour later or so, when we found out he was actually dead, I was live on Fox News, on Fox Business Channel, and it felt absolutely surreal. And I would say that in the last 2 weeks, everything has kind of felt surreal. Almost every story that we're dealing with politically in America and culturally right now with our culture wars, it seems like Charlie was deeply invested in, and in most cases holding the good line on, really trying to bridge the divide on things. And in some way, we need him now more than ever.
You know, Dave, in your New York Post piece that you wrote, that you dedicated to Charlie, you talked about when you went on some of these tours with him to do these debates, you know, you'd often find there'd be bomb threat calls made, or the fire alarm would go off, or, you know, things hurled at you guys. I guess the question is, and you say that you need Charlie more than ever now, a horrendous, tragic incident that took place. Why was he viewed by some as such an inflammatory, divisive personality and character?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's indicative of largely what's happened to the left, particularly in America, but I think really across the Western world, which is that instead of debating ideas, they just throw a couple labels on you and they assume that that's going to stick enough and kind of push you out of comfortable quarters. So if you say something like, oh, I want lower taxes or less government, or I don't believe in the welfare state, or I want borders, or I believe that, you know, a child's genitals match their gender. I mean, basic things. Instead of arguing the points, they'll usually call you, I mean, you know this, they'll call you a Nazi or a racist or a bigot or one of these other things. And that, for a long time, really did stifle the argument. Charlie, I think me and several other people, we really tried to walk through that and open up that conversation, particularly at colleges. I mean, that Charlie really was focused on the young generation, and I think that that's why you're seeing such an unbelievable reaction to his assassination, because I don't know that there's anyone else that would have been taken out in this space, for lack of a better term, that would have garnered the reaction, the positive reaction, I would say, amongst young people who are now reevaluating their lives, their faith, looking at old stories. I mean, the beautiful part, the silver lining to all of this, is there is such an incredibly dense amount of content that Charlie put out there, talking to college kids, you know, being interviewed, going on TV shows. And people are now watching who thought maybe, oh, he was this extremist or whatever they thought of him that the media said. And now they're watching his videos going, well, this guy made a lot of sense. Maybe I disagree with him. Okay, you might be a little more liberal, so you disagree with Charlie on abortion, let's say, but you can see that he was not an extremist. And I think over time, in some sense, he will become more popular than ever before. But the hole that we have without him, and the fact that his wife no longer has a husband, his two beautiful kids no longer have a father, I mean, there's just nothing that can be said about that.
Let's talk about, free speech and the stifling of free speech and debate. I mean, if we just look at what's happened over the course of the last couple of weeks, Jimmy Kimmel, taken off air, and the president backing that. Do you think then, when those sorts of things happen, it sort of threatens free speech as a whole? And it is free speech that many of Charlie Kirk's supporters, people like yourself and others, have said that he stood for and he believed. Do you think he would have looked at what happened with Jimmy Kimmel and said, no, I don't want that to happen?
Well, I think we have to make the distinction between the notion of free speech, that human beings can say what they want and be free to say what they want. And that might mean you're going to offend somebody and somebody might offend you. And then the particular protections that we have in the United States that are actually, I would say most of the world is quite jealous over, in that the government cannot infringe on your free speech. So look, the government did not force, Donald Trump did not force Disney or St. Clair, the affiliates, to get rid of Jimmy Kimmel or basically give him...
They felt the pressure, I guess, is what came out of that whole, if you look at the backstory of that it wasn't whether he said you need to do this. It was sort of the pressure that they felt.
Well, the pressure, so the question really is, did the pressure come from the administration? In which case, if a government was pressuring a private corporation to silence someone, that would be an infringement on our First Amendment rights. But I actually think the pressure was coming another way. The pressure actually was coming from the people. Jimmy, for a long time, has demonized people who didn't get vaccinated. He's demonized Trump supporters as racist, all of those things. The joke that really put him in hot water in this case was that he blamed Charlie's assassination on MAGA. That's what he said when he knew it was flatly not true. The people that the affiliates are beholden to are their viewers, and they were being inundated with calls saying, we don't want this guy on air. At the end of the day, it was a business decision. But I would also say this, Jimmy Kimmel, because it's not a First Amendment issue, if Jimmy Kimmel was taken off air by Disney that night, he could have, just like you and me and everybody else watching this, could have opened an account on YouTube and said the exact same thing that very night. So I think we have to be a little bit careful when we see that there are market forces that sometimes dictate things rather than that the government came in and did it, which of course I would absolutely be against in all cases.
Do you believe, though, he should have been taken off air, or, regardless of what he says, he fundamentally has the right to say it?
Oh, well, those are two different questions. I mean, he absolutely fundamentally has the right to make whatever joke he wants. He can offend everybody and all of those things. It's up to Disney and the affiliates as to whether they want to air that program. I would liken this a little bit to his colleague Stephen Colbert, who people got very upset that they're not renewing his show, but his show had $100 million a year budget, and if I understand correctly, was losing about $20 million a year. I mean, at the end of the day, these are companies that want to make money, and Colbert and Kimmel, I would say, decided to go very partisan in one direction. Long gone are the days of Johnny Carson, who at night tried to bring people together. And then you also have to keep in mind that people are just not watching these shows as much. So, I do my daily show on, almost 100th of a budget per year as to what Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert are doing, and then we can produce it and get it out to as many people as they were getting their shows out to. So the economics have changed on all of these things. But again, I completely defend any ridiculous, offensive joke about Charlie or me or anyone else, but it's the company that he works for, his decision as to whether they want to keep him or not.
Dave, I've just got a couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask a big question. Again, we're limited on time, but why does America, and I know that America has always been polarized in its history, but why does it feel so fraught in this moment?
It's a tough question. I spend a lot of time thinking about this and talking about this on my show. I think partly what has happened here is that, in a healthy society, in a healthy Western society, you want a tension between liberalism and conservatism. You want a tension between people that maybe want to be a little more socially liberal or want more government programs. And then and then on the other side, you have the more conservative aspect, which is usually attached more to religion and limited government. And you can kind of go back and forth with those things both ways. I think what has happened in America, but it's not just America, I think it's really all of Western Europe, is that the liberals stopped defending liberalism. The liberals went all in on progressivism and leftism. They went in on identity politics, what we now call wokeism. They sort of ushered in, they called us all racists while ushering in a racist set of ideas through diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of these other things. Also looking at our history and from an American perspective, trying to tell us that, we are fundamentally racist and we can never get over the stain of slavery and all of these things. And when the left really went crazy with that, it caused a certain portion of the right to go crazy. It was sort of a mirror image of that. So for years, when I was on the left, I'm not on the left anymore, I tried as a liberal to get the liberals to be more liberal. Unfortunately, the conclusion I've come to is that defending my liberal values has now become a conservative position, which, by the way, I think Donald Trump has done an incredible job of widening the MAGA tent, which is why you can have guys like Bobby Kennedy, who was running as a Democrat only 2 years ago, Tulsi Gabbard, who was running as a Democrat only 4 years ago, Joe Rogan, who certainly is no mainstream conservative, Elon Musk, me, et cetera, et cetera. You could have all these people within the MAGA movement.
And again, just briefly, so are we now seeing the rise of the woke right then?
There is something going on the right. I think it's largely a phenomenon that is fueled by algorithms and clicks, and it's a little hard to see if it's translating into real world. But I would say this, when 10 years ago, the woke left was ripping apart the liberals, there were very few people fighting against it. I'm proud to say I was one of them. I think we largely failed, but I did try. And Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and several other people really did try. On the right, I'm seeing a much stronger pushback against this new identitarian thing, this obsession with the Jews in Israel and several other things. There's a much stronger pushback. So I'm much more bullish that the right has some built-in defenses so that hopefully what has happened to the left does not happen to the right.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
It was my pleasure.